I'm Alice Thorneycroft, and this is Brilliant Minds in Conversation, the podcast series where we untap the stories and insights of individuals who've performed at the very top of their careers. And today I am joined by Harvey Thorneycroft. Slightly interesting podcast, this one for me, given that I'm also married to Harvey and business partners with him. But let me give you his credentials. Harvey is a former professional rugby player who has made 261 appearances for Northampton Saints and scored 100 tries. A wing, Harvey made his professional debut in 1987, representing England A and earning selection for the Barbarians. Originally trained as a surveyor when rugby was still amateur, he co-founded Robber Thorneycroft with former teammate Tim Robber in 1996, which he successfully sold to Williams-Lee in 2003, 2 years after retiring from Premiership rugby. After completing his service level agreement, Harvey set up Harvey Thorneycroft Limited in 2006 with myself, Alice Bufton, and this year we're celebrating our 20th anniversary. Welcome, Harvey.
Thank you for having me, Alice.
And as I said, this is a slightly strange, Brilliant Mind podcast for me because obviously I'm talking to someone I know incredibly well. I'm talking about a business I know incredibly well and work in. But because it's our 20th anniversary, we thought it would be fun to do this podcast, but also opportune to reflect on some of the people we've met, some of the events we've run, and some of the wonderful stories we have created in those 20 years. So, Harvey, I'm actually going to start with finding out a little bit about you in terms of your childhood, because you were born and bred in Northampton, were you not?
I was born and bred in Old Duston, Northampton, and very proud of that fact. It's a funny town, a very, very industrial sort of market town in the Midlands. Most people bypass it on the M1. But the county is fantastic. We don't tell anyone about the county because it's got the most beautiful stately homes and the most lovely countryside right next to the Cotswolds, really. So, yeah, very proud of the fact that I'm from Northampton.
And when you were a little boy growing up in Northampton, did you go down to watch the Saints?
There was one game that we would go down to as a school. I was at a school called Wellingborough School, and it was the East Midlands versus the Barbarians. And that was the game that we always used to go down to. And that's where I really saw Franklin's Gardens and wanted to be part of it. We would go down and watch it on a Wednesday afternoon. It was like the biggest fixture of the year. And I ended up playing in that match, the last game I ever played for the Barbarians. So that was a lovely way to punctuate the end of my Barbarians and Northampton Saints career.
But you didn't always start out in rugby, did you? That came a little bit later because I know for a fact that you were more of a footballer when you were younger and also athletics was big. Was that not true?
Yeah, the school I went to was Wellingborough School. It was a really good soccer school, very strong soccer school and cricket school. I saw both of them hit 6 sixes on the square playing for Somerset against Northamptonshire at the school. So it had those credentials. And we would play rugby on the second term. And it would never, ever really be a prominent sport because the squares, the cricket squares, were protected by this guy called Harry Neal, who was the groundsman. And if ever they were going to be cut up because of the mud and snow, then he'd make us go on a cross-country run rather than play rugby. So I didn't play rugby that much until I left school.
Okay, and I mean, I know this because obviously I've been married to you for a long time, but you were quite an energetic child, were you not? And your dad used to run you down and put cones out and do all sorts of athletic-y things with you, did he not, to sort of burn out some of that extra energy?
Yeah, I mean, looking back, they call it something else now, maybe ADHD or they call it hyperactive. And I was definitely hyperactive, and I still continue to be slightly over the top in terms of what I do. But I think that drive, that desire for having lots and lots of energy led me to want to play sport at a very, very high level.
But you were also fast, weren't you? I mean, you know, your speed came from doing all that training, did it not?
Well, if you speak to some of my contemporaries who all played for the British and Irish Lions, like Ian Hunter or Nick Beale or Ben Cohen or Slightholme, they would say I wasn't very fast. But I was pretty quick. Yeah, I was pretty quick.
You have always had an entrepreneurial streak in you. I mean, when I first met you, I saw that. Where do you think that entrepreneurialism came from?
Well, looking back, I've analysed this now. I didn't know this at the time. I didn't really know my grandfather because he passed away when I was very young, but he ran his own businesses, predominantly in Cambridge, and my dad ran his own businesses. When I sold my business some years later, one of my friends, a guy called Connor Davies, said to me, "You've got no place in a corporate environment, Harvey, but if I need to contact the Pope, then I'd give you a call." I think I was always going to be responsible for my own destiny. And then when I trace back another generation to my great-grandfather, he was a gold prospector called Levi Thorneycroft.
Oh, great name.
Never knew him. I don't know whether he was a particularly nice man from what my family tell me, but he ended up in Australia and New Zealand. So there's always been, when you say entrepreneurial, I wouldn't say I'm entrepreneurial because I think entrepreneurs take huge risks. I take calculated risks, but I always want to be responsible for my own destiny and I want to run my own ship. Now that has limitations, but it also has, for me, gives me a peace of mind because I can sleep easy at night knowing that I've done everything I possibly can and I'm not going to be beholden to someone who's going to tell me that I can't have a job. That would be unbelievably awful for me.
Okay. So have you got any examples of any of your kind of entrepreneurial behaviours early on? Because obviously when you were playing rugby at the beginning, it was amateur, wasn't it? So were you working at that point as well?
Yeah, it was an amateur rugby. I left school. I went to work at NatWest Bank on a management development program, and they made me wear a Father Christmas hat by the time I got to Christmas. And I said, "Look, I'm so sorry, I'm going to have to resign from this." And I didn't know what I was going to do. So at the time in Northamptonshire, if you wanted to earn money, you could go and work in a factory called Speedy Bake and earn quite a lot of money. But it was like 12-hour shifts, but you'd only do 4 12-hour shifts. I lasted 3 hours in that particular factory. They called it simultaneous engineering, where you'd be motivated if you moved from the chocolate eclairs to the custard creams or whatever they were. So I left that, I set up an odd job business with my mate, Mike Smith, and went round and said, "Harvey and Mike, back for the duration of the university holidays." We hadn't even been to university at that particular point. And we ended up doing the most amazing odd jobs. And people trusted us. They trusted us to clean their silver, to do their windows, do all of their odd jobs. And I started like earning my own money. I enjoyed earning my own money. And I could earn more money during that period of time with the odd job business than the best paying job at Speedy Bake in Northampton. So I thought, this is where I want to go. And again, I was in charge of my own destiny.
And I know this story, but it would be nice to share it nevertheless. While you were playing rugby, you also were selling a few shoes on the side, were you not?
Yeah, well, Northamptonshire is famous for Northampton Saints predominantly. But for me, when everyone asks me about, a memorable object, I will take a leather shoe. So a Church's shoe, if you can afford a Church's shoe.
Is that where they're originally from, in Northampton?
Church is originally from Northampton, Crockett and Jones, Geoffrey West, some of the most amazing brands, that are revered all around the world. And I had a friend whose father worked at Crockett and Jones, and there was a factory shop in Northamptonshire. So before a Premiership rugby game, I would have orders from London when I was doing my sandwich year as a chartered surveyor from all different types of people. So they would go down to the Burlington Arcade in London where these shoes are really, really expensive. And I could match the shoe, but there'd be slight seconds from the factory shop. And I'd bring them back on a Monday morning, set up at Fuller Pizer, in the equity partners flat, which is my sandwich year, and make more money from 8 o'clock to 9 o'clock where I distributed the shoes than I would as a sandwich student during the whole week. So I was starting to think, oh yeah, this is really, really good.
Just let me clarify. Were you explaining to your customers that there was a slight fault in the shoe?
Yeah, I mean, what I've ever done is always been transparent. I said, look, there might be a slight scuff on the shoe. That's why they're a factory second.
Okay.
But you could buy these shoes at a vastly different amount of money. And all I had was the inconvenience of bringing 20 pairs of shoes on a tube on a Monday morning and setting up in the equity partners flat. And I thought, well, I can suffer that indignity. Literally, people like Simon Gagan, Victor Abugu, Phil de Glanville, all these names that I would be playing with, because it was an amateur sport. We weren't getting paid, so we needed to find ways of getting through the week.
So were they telling you in advance what size they were, and then you were, or how?
Yeah, they would go down to the Burlington Arcade. They would order the size and the width that they had. Right. So literally we were matching these shoes.
That's hilarious.
And if you get a pair of Northamptonshire shoes, and anyone will say this, they're the most beautiful shoes.
Yeah, full transparency for anyone listening or watching, Harvey has a lot of shoes. I mean, I'm just going to put it out there. I have less shoes than my husband. I don't think that's kind of right. But
there's a reason for that, because nobody else, when I was playing rugby, wanted to go down to Church's Shoe Factory on a Friday. The productivity on a Friday at Church's Shoe Factory would go down significantly, and in anticipation of Northampton Saints playing on the Saturday.
Oh, really?
But Churches were a sponsor, so I knew that if I went down there on a Friday, I could sweet talk these lovely ladies that were in the factory shop, and I could buy Church's shoes at a reduced price and have them in my collection just for doing my responsibility as a player, fulfilling Northampton Saints sponsorship. So that's how I've got so many shoes.
Got a bit of an entrepreneurial streak right from the beginning there, Harves. I want to talk to you about the inspiration behind setting up Harvey Thorneycroft Limited. But before I do that, let's just take our listeners and viewers back a step, because you just talked about the degree you were doing. So just talk us through that. You were playing rugby and doing a degree. What was the degree you were doing?
Yeah, I was doing urban estate surveying in Trent, or it's now called Nottingham Trent University. At the time, it was Trent Polytechnic. And I was convinced that I didn't want to do a sports science degree, that I should do a vocational degree, because rugby was amateur, so there was never any guarantee that rugby would go on forever and you would make any money from it. Quite the reverse. It was an amateur sport until 1995. So I was always told that I needed to run in parallel to my sporting career, which was just fun and a hobby, a sort of business career. Wasn't bright enough to be an accountant or lawyer, but I could do urban estate surveying. And my mentor, Tony Hewitt, who was also involved with Northampton Saints, sort of guaranteed me a job at the end of my degree, working for a charter surveyors called Lambert Smith Hampton. But for me, that was very, very important. The only reason I actually did urban estate surveying was because a friend had an All-Star petrol card and a Cavalier car, and I thought, my gosh, if I could have a Cavalier and All-Star petrol card, which meant you could go anywhere in the country, then I had mobility. And so that was how I was thinking at the time. I was thinking that's much better than working at NatWest Bank in the drapery. And so you don't have any huge aspirations, even though I was playing a high level of rugby. It was an amateur sport. And rugby was different in those days.
So how did Robert Thorneycroft come about then?
So 1995, I went on non-travelling reserve to the World Cup and was playing with the blessing of Sir Ian McGeechan, who was my coach, for the Harlequins Club and training with Natal, covering the Springbok wingers whilst they were away on duty for the World Cup. And I saw a man break his neck playing for the World Cup, the Ivory Coast against Tonga, a guy called Max Brito. Max Brito basically snapped his neck, became a tetraplegic. And I was so incensed that nobody had done anything for him. I had this idea when I would get back. I met this guy at the World Cup final called Alistair McClellan, who was from Northampton and was wearing my colours at the World Cup final in 1995. I had a chat with him. And he said he'd worked in Ghana in Africa, and I had this idea. The Ivory Coast is next to Ghana on the map. What if I could raise money and go to Ghana and the Ivory Coast and play rugby? And so the first proper entrepreneurial thing I did was to get the England rugby side all signed up, subject to adequate remuneration, to play against a Springbok side in Ghana in front of the biggest black audience ever to watch a rugby match and football match simultaneously, well, not simultaneously, after each other. And it was sponsored by Land Rover. It was called the Discovery Tour of West Africa. Land Rover basically got into rugby as a consequence of that tour and pulled off the most audacious event. When I got back from that tour in the summer, I was cycling on a Eurostar trip to Paris from London, and a guy I was cycling with said, "What do you do?" And rather than say I was a chartered surveyor, I said, "I run events." And he gave me my first ever event at Althorpe House, and it was a business called Design Bridge. And because I'd got this event, I said to my business partner, Tim Rodber, who was the captain of the Ghana trip, "Would you like to join me in business?" And he said, "Yeah, let's set something up." And we were so bored as rugby players. This was a way of us leaving the training field and then starting to build something that we were really proud of. Because he'd been an army officer, I had been a chartered surveyor, and I felt that we were not fulfilling our true potential. So I never ever stopped working, even though I was a professional sportsman.
So how long did you run Harvey Thorneycroft for?
So we started in 1996 and we grew it. At the time, it was a small events business. And then, this is what Tim told me, it was a fully integrated marketing communications agency when we sold it at the height of the market in 2003 to a company called the Williams Lee Group and the wonderful Tim Griffiths, who remains a friend today.
Excellent. So you sold the business, and then what did you do?
Well, when you sell a business, you have to fulfill a service level agreement and not be a bad leaver. And this particular deal was life-changing for me. It was slightly different for Tim because he had aspirations beyond where I had, but this was a life-changing sort of intervention for me, and I wanted to make sure that I did a good job. So I went into the business development team of Williams Lee, and at the time I think Williams Lee were turning over about 180 million turnover, but this inspirational leader with an amazing team that he had around him essentially grew the business to 1 billion turnover and sold it to Deutsche Post. And a part of our original deal was that we had cash and equity in Williams Lee. And the equity was the risky part. Because the business grew, our original settlement grew significantly. And so after 2 years, I said to Tim, the old business that I had sold, Harvey Thorneycroft, wasn't necessarily going in the direction I wanted it to go into. Would he be prepared to sell it back to me and a group of people who were interested in putting it into their portfolio? One of which was Nigel Ray and a wonderful man called Dominic Sylvester. I met in Bermuda in 1994. And a number of the Saracens owners bought back Harvey Thorneycroft, and I had a year to transition that before I started Harvey Thorneycroft Limited.
Right, okay. So, when did you meet me? I'm getting confused now.
I met you in 2002 and we got married in 2004.
And you and I set up the business in 2006.
2006 is when we set it up, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So, and there's actually a little aside here. Before I met Harvey, I was working for my own business. I was running a business which looked after a handful of speakers, one of whom was Frank Dick, wonderful coach, athletics coach for Great Britain and Europe. And I'll never forget this, quite funny really. I used to run workshops with him and we would have lots of footage of different sport. And there was a compilation piece of video. It was probably about 2 minutes long. And we'd gone out and we'd interviewed top coaches from different sports, one of whom was Ian McGeechan from Northampton Saints. And he was obviously doing amazing work as a coach in wider rugby, not just obviously at the Saints. And there was this little bit of footage that I used to play every time I'd run a workshop with Frank. It was about 10 seconds worth of seeing Ian out at the Saints at Franklin's Gardens in the evening under floodlights, training some team, which was the Saints at the time. And Harvey, unbeknown to me, my future husband, was in that little bit of footage. And I never knew it was Harvey. I didn't even know you played rugby when I met you. And I've been using this, and it wasn't till probably, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 years after we were married that I don't even know how we discovered it.
Well, I was probably in one of those workshops.
And you saw it.
Frank was unbelievably inspiring to me.
Yeah.
And I think what was amazing, you helped me make that transition from rugby and business because you were working with someone who was truly inspirational. So,
but did you see the footage? I can't remember.
Yeah, I saw the footage,
and
I said,
oh my God,
that's us
me.
training
That's us
at
training.
Franklin's Gardens.
And I've been using this video for years, not even knowing you, and then ended up getting married. How bizarre was that?
Exactly.
Very bizarre. Right, so let's just talk a little bit about Harvey Thorneycroft Limited. So, talk me through the inspiration behind that.
Well, I think working with you in your old business, Aberdeen Management and Consulting, which Frank was part of, and getting to know you in sort of 2002, and then we sold our business in 2003, which was a very, very odd period of time for me because we sold it in the April 2003. And sadly, I had a family bereavement in the November. I lost my sister at almost exactly the same time as I saw England won the World Cup. And by that stage in 2003, I was a slightly rotund ex-rugby player who'd done quite well selling a business, but was blissfully unhappy. And we would always talk about the future and what we wanted our future to be. And it wasn't necessarily about making money, although we'd had a really good intervention in selling the business. And so for me, I was looking for some sort of meaning. And I guess, like most sportsmen, when they transition, there's that period of, well, what I'm going to do. But I transitioned really well with Tim Rodber, but I still was blissfully unhappy and I couldn't work out why. And your sister invited us to an unbelievable house in Florida, and I met an extraordinarily intelligent but entrepreneurial man in the most amazing house, who sadly was suffering from an illness. And he said something just throwaway to us when we were drinking bad arse wine coffee in his kitchen. He said he spent most of his life trying to acquire wealth, the remaining part trying to acquire health. And he defined it physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. And at the time, having transitioned from sport into business, I could see lots and lots of people in business were out of kilter. You know, use a Frank Dick analogy, their 3-lane highway was out of kilter. I mean, you explain what the 3-lane highway is, because he used to use that, and that was the thing that really resonated with me. And then I'll come back to the story.
Yeah, so Frank used to use an analogy about how to kind of keep your life in balance, and he would use a metaphor. And he'd say your life is like a 3-lane motorway. You have your career in the fast lane, your friends and family in the middle lane, and you in the inside lane. And if anything happens in any one of those 3 lanes, it has an effect on the other lanes. So as we know, when we're driving, something happens in one of the lanes, everything slows down. So he was basically making the point that you can't look at your career in isolation. You have to look at yourself as a human being, all aspects of yourself. And Frank was really good at doing this with his athletes. So if an athlete wasn't performing for whatever reason, it wasn't necessarily to do with their career lane. It could be something to do with their friends and family or something personal that was happening to them. And great coaches address the whole person. You can't look at it in isolation. So he was basically using that analogy to explain how you have to keep balance in your life and how important balance is, because you can't get a decent performance out of somebody if anything in those lanes is afoot. You have to address it, otherwise you won't get that super performance out of someone.
And having been party to what Alice was doing in her old business, which she was the MD of.
I am here. You can just address me.
I know.
It's like I'm in my third person.
I know, but I was just inspired by this, and I could see the other people that she was working with. And when we got back from Florida, it was almost like a penny drop moment for both of us. We decided we'd done quite well. We'd bought our first house together, and we thought we need to do something that helps those individuals in corporate life perform better in their physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual states. Now, looking back in 2003, that was an extraordinary thing to be thinking about.
Well, I remember when we went to America, we used to go and visit my sister quite a bit. In fact, I think I was pregnant with Scarlett, but I didn't know. I remember back then, that must have been, well, when was that? How old's Scarlett? We've got 2 children. Scarlett's our oldest. So that must have been 2006, that sort of time. I remember looking out, it's bizarre to say, but looking out I was in San Francisco, and we were in a place called Marin County, really nice, beautiful part just outside San Francisco, just over the bridge. And I remember looking out and seeing people jogging. Now, that sounds ridiculous to say that, because we see people jogging all the time now. But back then, I just remember thinking, gosh, a lot of people here are terribly healthy. You know, are they all athletes or something? Because there were like quite a few people jogging on the pavements and on the trails and things. And it was a bizarre thing to reflect back on, because that was kind of how people were starting to address their balance. They were looking at themselves, not just in terms of were they performing at work, but how fit were they? How healthy were they? Were they eating the right sorts of foods? Were they keeping themselves in good shape? Because if you're in good shape physically, you are in better shape mentally. And that was happening kind of quietly when we were in California. And I remember noticing it.
And as a result of observing that, we realised that we potentially had an opportunity to help corporates. But we had to find an opportunity, because up until that point, whilst you'd been doing serious events with Abingdon Management and Consulting, I was doing more frivolous events. You know, they were incentives or hospitality or conferences in beautiful locations around the world. And a penny drop moment happened corporately for us. So I met a company called Berwin Leighton Paisner, which was a big law firm. Neville Eisenberg was the senior partner of this firm, and they were looking to build a relationship. And this is what we really do now. The strategic conundrum was, how do they build better relationships with the National Australia Group, Barclays, Tesco's, and all the significant players within those. And all the lawyers knew the 45, 50 people that they needed to get close to. And my first job was to find out how I could build a relationship with Barclays. Up until this point, they'd never been able to build a really strong relationship with Barclays. And what they were doing was basically inviting them to do race days or hospitality or Wimbledon, but nobody would come. So I said, well, look, why don't I go and ask the CEO of Barclays, a guy called Peter Harvey, who's a really good friend of us now. In fact, Peter came to our house on Super Saturday, didn't he?
Yeah.
We're jumping around here. And because he was an ex-rugby player, I asked him, "Are you okay, mate?" Because he looked like he'd had a stroke and his face had dropped. Now, at this particular point in time, in 2003, 2004, the markets were flying. Everyone was out of kilter. And we'd seen this in America. And we thought, I wonder if we could do something around health and wellness, because that's what we wanted to do. That was our passion. So I said to him, "Mate, well, what's happened?" He said, "Well, I'm just under pressure." I said, "Could I do something on health and wellness for your team?" He said, "If you do something on health and wellness, you can have all 45 people. I can't guarantee it, but I'll get them all out on one particular day." I took this back to about 12 or 13 lawyers. I can never forget this. And they said, "That will never work." I said, "Well, I'll make it work."
Oh,
So
and I remember.
you tell them about the event.
We did a... we obviously put together a brilliant event, but I remember quite an important part of that event is to capture the attention of those individuals at Barclays, to really hook them in, to make them want to come, because we didn't want them to sort of refuse the offer of coming out for the day. We sent them an invitation, and that was back in the day when print was, king.
2004.
Yeah, it was.
January 2004.
Yes, and we sent them in the post, to each individual in that team, an invitation to come, but it was a urine chart, and it had lots of different urine colours. Basically, it was like a paint, a paint card with different shades of yellow, and it said, "Do you know how hydrated you are? If you don't know how hydrated you are, how on earth can you, perform at your best? You need to be hydrated to get the best out of you." And we put together some really clever communications around this, and I invited them to the day, which was
Wellgold. Do you not remember Wellgold?
Yeah. No, I do. And wasn't it in Mulberry? Where was it?
It was in a place called Stapleford Park,
yeah.
which Frank Dick had got an association with.
Yes.
So the product that we put together, you were invited through this bizarre invitation, as Malice has mentioned, but we got all 45 people from Barclays, plus all the key people from the firm of lawyers. And I'll never forget this. Martin Johnson had just won the World Cup, so he was the guy who was going to talk about his 3-lane highway, because he'd lost his mother, he'd had young family, he'd won the World Cup, and probably was one of the most successful people of his generation. We needed someone to talk about nutrition, and we read a book called The Marathon Running Chef, and we've had a relationship with this man for a long time. Michel Roux Jr. came in to talk about nutrition, and Frank Dick delivered his keynote speech. And they were the 3 people that we asked to, if you like, create the content for this event that led to this very, very different intervention with corporately. And that led to them not just getting on the panel of Barclays, but growing the fee generation. And it wasn't just the event, but we started to catalyse things with them, which led to them building lasting relationships. And we realised at that point we needed to change the way that we were thinking, and that's where we formed Harvey Thorneycroft Limited.
So this relationship building thing, I mean, it sounds like, relatively straightforward, but it isn't, is it? I mean, talk to me about how you build relationships, because that is your super strength. I mean, I know that. I've been married to you for a long time. I can see that play out. But what is it? How do you build lasting relationships?
Well, I feel quite emotional when I say this, because I remember it was my mum and my nan and my aunties, and I grew up with a family of very, very strong women. Lots of cups of tea, cakes around the table, and no one could get above themselves. I remember playing for England Colts for the first time, which I thought was amazing. And my family said, "Well, don't get above yourself. You remember who you are." My mum used to make me get up for anyone that was old or a woman on a bus or train, and I always follow that through now. I can't literally sit down if there's someone in more need of the place than me. So that's where it originally came from. And I didn't find talking to people, because I'd grown up with all these lovely women having cups of tea, gossiping, a problem. So when I started, and this is really where I started to build relationships with, so I started to realise the power of the people that I was playing in front of at Franklin's Gardens and further afield. So when you come off a pitch playing a Premiership game, you will talk to the committee members that are generally CEOs of businesses, and they are in the inner sanctum, which is the changing rooms. Then after the game, you'll sign autographs and talk to kids, and you have to talk to them on a different level. Then contractually, even though we were amateur, we'd have to go up and talk to the boxes after the game, the people that had sponsored our club, Carlsberg and FG Watson Partners and various other different companies that were involved in Northampton. Travis Perkins. Yeah. And so you had to talk to them on a level, because they were all business people and then had a few drinks. Then you'd go into the players' enclosure, and you could have a situation, it's very contrasting, but Earl Spencer used to love watching the Saints, and he would come down and watch a game. And then a guy who'd won, I love Church's, the productivity at Church's shoe factory for that particular month would be invited into the inner sanctum. And so both those people had a common denominator, and I was their common denominator, which is, even though this guy's got a Van Dyke on his wall at the most beautiful stately home where I had my testimonial, this guy might live in a terraced house in the middle of Northamptonshire, but you have to be able to talk to these people. And so I realised the power of making people feel comfortable, because they may never get that moment again. Earl Spencer's very privileged, but this guy might not get that moment again. And if you belittle that in any way, and my biggest fear of failure would be someone saying, well, he was a bit up his own arse. My mum would absolutely despise that. So I got to know how to talk to people properly.
Okay. You've written 2 books. Now, this is something about you that I don't think many people know. You actually really enjoy writing, don't you?
Yeah, which is quite odd, bearing in mind I failed my English language twice.
Which I also knew. I wasn't going to mention that, but thanks for putting that out there. Actually, it's a bit of a standard joke in our family, because when Harvey writes a card, like a birthday card or a Christmas card, or to myself or to the kids, he'll always write like 2 sides of writing, at least. Lots of memories, lots of stories, lots of lovely things. And then whenever I write a card, it's a little bit more short, isn't it? And to the point.
Best wishes. Thank you.
Not quite.
Alice.
That's a bit harsh. That's a bit harsh. Anyway, you've always enjoyed writing. It's something that you've really enjoyed doing over your career. And I remember you deciding you wanted to write your first book when Scarlett was born, and that was a big transition in our lives. A first child. And you used to write when I would go to bed quite early, because I'd obviously be up all night with Scarlett. You used to go downstairs and start writing this book. And it was called...
Making My Own Luck.
But what did you say, first of all? Come on, tell that story.
I can't remember. Can you remember?
Yeah, it was so... You said, I think I'm going to call it Memorable Moments or something like that. I was like, don't do that. That doesn't sound like it's going to leap off the shelves. So we had a bit of a brainstorm. And then... I think we were at the time, when you were writing that book, we were exploring that sort of notion of success, what success looks like and what is success for people. And we were also exploring, remember, with Casper, this notion of luck. And, does luck exist, or are you actually in control of your own luck, and that whole kind of conversation?
Yeah, Casper used to say, luck is the thing you can't predict, but lucky people find themselves in places where they receive that luck.
Yeah, and just for those people who don't know Casper Barry is one of our brilliant minds, and we'll talk a little bit about him in a moment.
Well, he was, if you remember, the person that you discovered of our brilliant minds. He's the person that we've worked with the most over this period of time.
Yeah.
And he's a friend of the family.
Oh, completely. Yeah, Casper is a wonderful man. And I met him, oh my goodness me, 25 years ago probably, before I knew you. And at that point, when I was running my business, one of the things I like to do is go out and try and find interesting people. And one of the key parts of that job for me was trying to find people who didn't necessarily have notoriety. And I found myself in this location in Hertfordshire, and there was a small business running an event, and they were called the Wizards. Very interesting little business. I don't think they exist anymore, sadly. But when I went to this event as a guest, I met a Buddhist monk, a horse whisperer and a horse, and a former professional poker player, amongst some others who weren't as memorable. Unfortunately, I can't think who they were. There were probably about 6 or 7 people. And as a participant, if you like, or as an audience member, you kind of walk around and you'd meet these people. And I remember thinking at the time when I met Casper, he was talking about poker and using poker as a metaphor for exploring risk and decision making. And I thought, whoa, this guy has got a really interesting topic here. And I can see him flying in a corporate market. I don't know this bloke, but there's something telling me that he's got an awful lot of mileage. And obviously when I met him and then found out his backstory, which we'll talk about a little bit later, I realised there was even more than I had first thought. The sad thing was I absolutely adored the Buddhist monk and the horse whisperer, but I just couldn't find a way of getting them into a corporate setting. I really tried.
Well, do you not remember I did a telephone call with a corporate guy who wanted to book the Buddhist monk? And after the call, he said he wasn't very corporate.
He wasn't very corporate.
He's a Buddhist monk. Why is he going to be corporate?
I know, we really did try. Interestingly, we probably could get away with the horse whisperer right now and a Buddhist monk because things have moved on. But back then it was not going to go anywhere. Okay, I want to move quickly on now to Brilliant Minds and how we set Brilliant Minds up all those years ago. And where did that come from? What was that, what was behind that?
Well, I think you were driving Brilliant Minds. You were always, if you like, the protector of the content. Everything had to be really, really good quality. So you'd met people like Casper, you'd met people like Dr. Doreen Dugmore, Michelle Rue, and James Cracknell, some of those early people that did our Getting the Edge events.
Yeah, I mean, just to add in there, we were really fortunate in our business. It was like, I look back at those days where we were meeting the most incredible people. And it was almost like...
Oh, we still do.
Well, we still do, yeah. But, it's almost like you sort of got your own personal self-development going on because you're meeting all these incredible people who've done amazing things and sharing their wisdom and sharing their insights and learning from them. And it was just it was addictive. You almost just can't get enough of it.
Well, you had an idea, didn't you?
Well, yeah, I did. I suppose for me, it was always about, I feel a little bit selfish because these people need to be shared on a wider platform, which is why we came up with the Brilliant Minds Showcase, which was, our community, the people that we already knew, benefiting from these amazing brilliant minds. But it was almost like that wasn't good enough. It's great to have the showcase, and we absolutely adore doing that.
Yeah, just explain the showcase, because...
Well, you do.
Well, the showcase was set up, the first one we did was Sandown, which is very close to where we live, and we've done 13 Brilliant Minds showcases now, and it's changed over time. But we wanted to give the people that we were meeting for a coffee access to our corporate community. And then we realised that actually we can only probably get 250 people in a room. So there's only a small amount of corporates that are going to benefit from that. And it was a lovely day where we'd invite the guests to hear really, really good content, which Alice would curate, and she moderates it now.
Me.
Yeah, absolutely. And basically, that wasn't enough. And one of the guys who was sitting in the audience, he'd been invited by a friend, and this is before anyone was doing anything digitally, way, way before the Diary of a CEO, which is fantastic, and I listened to that, or the High Performance Podcast with Damien Hughes and Jake Humphreys. Way, way before those sort of interventions, we had this idea that came through a guy called Mark Sinclair, who was doing something called Your Business Channel. And he had this idea that he wanted to film the Brilliant Minds and create Brilliant Minds briefings that we would send out to create a greater awareness. And this concept, which you did with him, fundamentally changed the way that we were able to approach our marketplace. Much bigger, and it opened our whole mind.
Mark was transformational in terms of digitalising all that content. I think the thing that we had worked out as a business at that point is, because we were solving our clients' problems and clients were coming to us with kind of problem statements, and we were solving them sometimes through events, sometimes through bringing an expert in, whatever it might be. What we'd come to realise is every business felt that their problem was unique, and we knew that that was not the case, that business problems were fairly generic. And actually, if we were smart, we could lead our content via topics that we knew would be pertinent in business, and we could get sound bites from our wonderful Brilliant Minds community about those topics, and then staple them together. So, for example, you might have a generic business topic like understanding risk and decision making. And what we would be doing is getting more than one person's opinion on that. So we might have a former professional poker player's opinion. We might have a heart surgeon's opinion. We might have a bomb disposal expert's opinion. We might have a fighter pilot's opinion, all around how to make decisions, take calculated risks, how to deal with uncertainty. So we were being really quite smart about understanding what our clients wanted, but also matching up the interesting people that could add some kind of cognitive diversity to that topic, which was causing them problems. So that was the Brilliant Minds briefings. And then Mark was absolutely instrumental in digitalising that and pushing that out to a wider community, which I was so pleased about, because it just felt we needed more people to hear about these wonderful bits of advice.
And this is where you need to surround yourself with people who have different ideas, better than you, because whilst we had a very good business at the time, it was like a catalyst to change the way people perceived us, because going digital was not an area that we really knew much about, but we developed a lovely relationship with Mark and his team, which we did for 7 or 8 years, you know, and most of Brilliant Minds' Harvey Thorneycroft YouTube site is full of those videos that we did at that particular point in time, some of which are highly relevant, and included filming at the house here, the most amazing clips with people like Ed Balls and Sebastian Coe.
Yes, I remember.
But actually, we, pre-COVID, were only working with people we felt had less notoriety but could deliver more content and more substance. And by default, because they were less notorious, were less expensive in the marketplace. And so we could do more with them. That changed, obviously, when COVID came in.
Why did that change?
Well, because people weren't attending events, live events completely changed. And that was a pivotal moment for us. We had to morph and change as well. When they suddenly came out of COVID, they needed to get people back into their offices. And so we started to work with the most unbelievable personalities.
So the notoriety would drag people back?
Yeah, it was having something like an anchor to get them back to want to go into offices or travel around the world again. It took a long while to get going.
We meet an awful lot of successful people. We're really, really lucky in our business, not just the Brilliant Minds community, but the clients that we work with. How would you define success?
Well, I would say first and foremost, it's different for different people. And I've spent not just 20 odd years working in business, but before that, working with high performance teams in, have I mentioned it before? Northampton Saints. What an environment that is. And I was always intrigued by what meant to people to be successful. Everyone would say that. Some people, and having worked with Kevin Dutton, I know you've done a podcast with him, many of the people that you see who are probably the most successful, if you define them in terms of their careers, are driven. They never ever look back or reflect on the past. They're only driving forward. Now, that's one definition of success. That could be heart surgeons, military leaders, bomb disposal expert. You need them to be literally looking forward and making sure that they do the sorts of things around the world that many of us are not capable of doing. My definition would be a mixture of looking to the future, because everyone needs to have purpose, but to enjoy the moment. We'll not get this moment back again. This is the first time that you and I have done this. We've got to enjoy it, even though I know you're not enjoying it.
That's so harsh.
And then you have to look back at the past. And so that's why I wrote Making My Own Luck, because I wanted Scarlett and Harry, who are our children, to know what Dad was like before he was Dad. So success to me is different for different people. And do you know what? Having met all these people, I still don't know what the true definition of success is, but it's okay to have your own definition.
Okay, what's it like running a business with your wife?
Well, I compartmentalise. You have to. You're my best mate. You're the mother of my children. And you're someone I revere in terms of business. You have very different skill sets to mine. But we complement each other. But there is a mutual respect in every aspect of our lives. When I look back, I always had a business partner in Tim Broadbent, and I trusted him implicitly. We had different views on life, but when it came to rugby and business, we were completely and utterly focused and driven to want to achieve certain objectives. And again, like the definition of success, his were very different to mine. And I felt truly blessed when I married you, and you have similar attributes to Tim in terms of the things that I'm not particularly good at, you are good at. And I think everyone needs, in any business, a very, very strong partnership.
Do you think anybody could work with their other half?
I don't know, because I haven't married anyone. I'm not going to marry anyone. I'm sure it's difficult for different people, but it works for us, and we have a common passion. And I would say, as we say to our kids and we say to our clients, if you're passionate about what you do, it doesn't feel like work. We are lucky. We meet the most extraordinary people in our day-to-day and feel blessed that we can connect. And in an AI age, it's even more important to connect.
What's the most annoying thing about me when you work with me?
You're always right. And generally speaking, you are always right. And generally speaking, when I was working with Rodders, he was always right. But occasionally you need, both of you, the yellow card. And Rodders and I we knew how to get the best out of each other. And I think that's what we know how to get the best out of each other too.
Now, this is obviously 20-year anniversary for the business, and when we set it up, we were absolutely adamant it would be a lifestyle business. But what does that mean to you?
Well, for me, a lifestyle business is something you're passionate about, and when I reflect back on working in corporate life for the small period of time that I did, it wasn't particularly enjoyable. Every day of doing this for 20 years has been enjoyable. And if that's called a lifestyle business, that's fine. Many of the very senior people that I meet will say, well, you run a lifestyle business. And it's almost a derogatory term. They have no idea how fortunate we are to be associated with the brilliant mind community that we have, but also the clients that we have. They trust us implicitly. And all we do is listen and work out what they need to achieve. And we're very, very fortunate to have that relationship with them.
Yeah, I mean, I would also say that for me, a lifestyle business means that you can fit your life in around your business and your business around your life. That's what I think a lifestyle business means. And I think that is something I do not take for granted. And those days when I used to schlep it to Canary Wharf, to my job up in Ogilvy, although it was wonderful and I met amazing people and it was a period of my life where I was working really, really hard, I don't look back and go, I wish I was doing that. We made a really conscious decision that we were going to set up a business near where we lived that would give us time around the edges to do the things we loved. And that was way before we had kids. And I feel really proud that we've managed to keep that, if you like, that drive in our business, which is to keep things in balance. I mean, you know, look, listen, you don't get it right all the time, but the majority of the time we do. I've been able to, as a mum, go to all the performances, as have you, of the kids at school. We've been able to take advantage of all those opportunities when they've been growing up. We haven't had to go, oh, I've got to go into work today, I'm going to miss, you know, whatever it is. We've gone, no, I'm going to do that and I'll put the work round it. And I think that although there's lots of different pressures when you run your own company, that is one thing I find hugely valuable.
Yeah, but we made choices at a very early stage, and it was very important. Someone told me choice, not chance, determines destiny. So we knew right from the onset that this is what we wanted to do. But to go back to what we were talking about, success, a lot of successful people wouldn't regard what we're doing as relatively successful.
Yeah, but how are they measuring it?
Well, that's why success is different for different people. We made some choices. We stuck to those choices. It went back to the 3-lane highway. You know, we have our career, we have our family, our friends, and we have our own personal well-being. If any of those lanes cross, it affects the way the others perform. And for me, having the ability to make those choices early on is not through chance. We've done it absolutely through self-determination and desire to want to live that type of lifestyle.
Okay, so my final question, Harvey, is what do you see the future of in terms of Harvey Thorneycroft Limited? What do you see that future looking like?
Well, we've worked now with somewhere in the region of about 430, 440 brilliant minds, either once or in the case of someone like Casper, 300 or 400 times. I'm very, very proud of that. But I'll be very, very honest with you. The audiences that we get to are the privileged audiences, the high-end corporates that have the ability to purchase these individuals. And for our 20th year, we are producing 20 films and 20 podcasts. And my desire is for Harvey Thorneycroft Limited and the content that we produce, which you're doing a brilliant job with, to get to wider audiences other than the privileged. And if we can do that through our community, that would be a lovely legacy for us to leave, because we are blessed, the people that we meet. You know, you remember meeting Martin Elliott for the very first time?
Yeah, absolutely. I remember exactly the cafe we were in, just outside Great Ormond Street Hospital, and we had to go downstairs, and it was a really crowded cafe, and there was barely a table to sit on, and we squeezed ourselves in, and we sat there, and it had been a right old palaver getting there, and then Martin opened his mouth, and we just sat listening with our mouths open, aghast at the stories he was sharing, the experiences he's had, the whole Formula One connection. I mean, it was like mind-blowing.
Well, let me just explain that. So at the time, one of the best corporate speakers, and remains one of the best corporate speakers and writers, a former Olympian, Matthew Said, suggested that we went to meet this guy called Martin Elliott. And this is such a privilege. He was the medical director of Great Ormond Street, is on the boards of the Royal Marsden, and he was a surgeon when there were no computers, there was no open heart surgery, there were no monitors, there was no 3D printing of organs. And he recognised that when they were doing an operation, that they were losing children from the operating theatre to the high dependency wards, and he wanted to do something about it. And if by chance someone saw an aerial shot of a pit stop in Formula One, and the aerial shot of a operating theatre, when you look down at them, they're very similar.
It was his South African colleague at the time.
It was his South African colleague.
He's also a surgeon.
Complex machinery and people moving around it. So he had this idea, which Matthew picked up on in his book, Black Box Thinking, if they could go out of their hospital environment, improve what they were doing by looking at aviation or the Royal Ballet School or the way hotels allow people to flow through hotels, and in this particular case, how they could flow through the hospital, and Formula One. I mean, they invited Ron Dennis in and did some amazing things. That model that he put into Great Ormond Street reduced the mortality of children. So that's real world stuff. But actually, that is a blueprint now in hospitals all around the world. So when you meet Martin Elliott and you meet brilliant minds like this, you feel like you're in the presence of greatness. And all we're doing is passing on that information to allow other people to benefit from that. So how do you maintain balance in your life and work?
Well, I have always had to be very prescriptive about this because I think probably I've learned the hard way. I have started, as you get older, you work out for yourself where your stresses are. And for me, the way I maintain balance in my life is through exercise. I have to exercise in order to help myself switch off and to move and transition from one thing to another. So every day, and you know this because we do this together, every day, even though we work from home, we have a virtual commute. We get on the bicycles, we stick the kids on the bus to school, we get on the bicycles, we cycle for 14 kilometres around Bushy Park, down the Thames by Hampton Court Palace, absolutely beautiful cycle, back home. Once I get back into my home after that bike ride, I'm in work mode. So that is my transition from home to work. And equally, at the end of the day, I also have to have a transition time. So after we've fed the kids, got everybody sorted, it's go and do some exercise. And in this case, for us at the moment, it's Pilates. We've been doing it for nearly 2.5 years. And it's a way of transitioning out of my workday into my home life. So for me, balance is hugely important, but the way I get it is through exercise. I am a nicer person if I can get my exercise in. If I don't get my exercise in, I feel frustrated, I feel stressed, I feel a different person. So I need that. It's much for me about the physical as it is the mental. It clears my head, it gives me perspective, it allows me to perform better. And I will go out of my way, and you know this, I'll go out of my way to find time to do that. Even if I'm tired, I still need it. And when I cycle to my meetings in London, I'm very committed and dedicated because I know the benefit it gives me. On behalf of everybody who's been listening and watching, this has been Brilliant Minds, and our guest today has been Harvey Thorneycroft. And I just want to say, on behalf of both Harvey and I, thank you so much to all our clients out there who have supported us for the last 20 years. I want to thank the Brilliant Minds community that is forever growing, the recommendations and the referrals that you give us. We are so super grateful. And we want to say happy anniversary to Harvey Thorneycroft Limited. And here's to another 20 years. Many thanks.